DealQuest listeners and viewers, I am so excited to have Dr. Pat Baxter on an upcoming episode of DealQuest. She talks about emotion. She's an expert in emotional intelligence, which, I might not have used that terminology, but if you listen to anything I talk about negotiation and deals and, self-awareness and that kind of stuff, this stuff is right on point. So, Dr. Pat, what are people going to hear about on your episode of DealQuest?
Well, that emotion is not a four-letter word. that it is part of who you are and part of the people that you interact with, and it should be part of every negotiation you make.
No question about it. And I know that you have an understanding of the brain science, and we're going to talk about some new developments, right? And there's some interesting stuff going on, right?
Yeah, there's so much to know. I say that it's the brain that's the new frontier.
Yeah,
we don't know this amount of what the brain is and what it does. We are learning more every single day. And I think one of the key things is to, as we get this information, how do we incorporate it into how we interact and how we do business?
Love it. So folks, check it out. It's going to be a great episode.
Thank you.
Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started.
DealQuest listeners and viewers, I am so excited to have Dr. Patricia Baxter on this episode of DealQuest. Using hard-won lessons in her 30-plus year corporate career as a global talent management leader and consultant, she now serves as an executive coach to diverse emerging leaders, helping them gain comfort and competence using emotional intelligence. She holds a doctorate in organizational leadership from Argosy University, an MS in education from the City University of New York, and is certified in numerous leadership assessments. Dr. Pat is the recipient of the prestigious Society of Emotional Intelligence Ambassador Award, is certified to teach resilience and thriving by the National Wellness Institute, and proudly serves on the advisory board of Global Wellbeing for Women. Dr. Pat contributed her work to the Professional Women's Network 2017 anthology and recently published Power Women Called to Lead in 2021. She has authored 2 books, Cool Change, Turning Emotions into Leadership Strengths in 2015, and 101 Ways to Grow a Resilient and Awesome Team in 2018, now in its second printing. I am so excited to have Dr. Pat on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be with you again.
So there is so much that I want to ask you and talk about in terms of what you do now and how emotional intelligence impacts deals and, because it impacts everything we do. But before we go there, I want to take you back to when you were growing up as a little girl, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What is it that you wanted to do, wanted to be? I would think a coach on emotional intelligence probably wasn't it at that age, but maybe I'm wrong. You tell me.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is I wanted to be rich. So we'll start with that.
Okay.
No, it's the furthest thing. It's interesting. One of the things I use in a lot of my presentations is when I was a kid, we had Uncle Albert who lived with us.
Okay.
And he saw a lot of my meltdowns as a kid, as a teenager. And one thing he always said to me was, Patty, you're too emotional. Calm down. And I always found that insulting, but as I grow older and understand more about people and the brain and how we're equipped, he was right with in terms of calming down makes a difference.
Yeah, maybe not the judgmental part of it, but the advice part of it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, boy, I am so. I mean, I am far from as educated as you are in this area, I'm sure, but I've been sort of fascinated by the recent developments in brain science because we know so little about the brain, and but in recent years we've learned a lot more than we used to. And just the functioning of the brain and how it works and how it impacts these things is something that's just a fascinating sort of mini hobby, for me to study.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just about every day there is some progress in the world of neuroscience, and most recently about the neuroplasticity of the brain and how we can literally reshape the brain and how it functions. And every day I'm reading something else about the different centers in our brains.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Fascinating.
And that's another thing that obviously affects everything in our lives and business and deals, et cetera. One last question looking back. Do you remember, it could have been as a kid or later or whatever, but any kind of sort of early first kind of deal of any type that comes to mind?
Deal?
Yeah, that you did?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is good old Uncle Albert again, because he pretty much helped raise me. And I remember I remember as a kid doing a lot of things that I really didn't want to do in terms of helping, cleaning, picking up after myself. But I realized that was a tool to get to what I needed. And it made Uncle Albert feel better when I cleaned up my room. It made my mom and dad, they were working 2 or 3 jobs.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was something I learned early on, to be helpful as opposed to making things more, I don't know, the word that came to my mind was dramatic.
So you recognize there was some sort of implicit trade-off or deal in handling the stuff they wanted you to handle because you got something out of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even as a kid, you realize that.
Yeah. That's great. And it's interesting because one of the things that fascinates me, and I ask a lot of my guests, in various ways, is and it sort of relates to what you do generally, is always like, what has somebody get the mindset of a deal maker, right? And I believe anything we do in life starts with mindset, right? Yep. Whether it's being in a healthy, partner relationship, right? If you don't have the right mindset, whether it's about yourself or it's about relationships or it's about other people, that's not going to work. If you don't see yourself as successful, you're probably not going to be successful. If you don't see yourself as a deal maker, you're not going to do deals. So I'm curious with what you do with emotional intelligence, your understanding of all that. What is your, because I think even that example from when you were younger is a mini example of having something shift in the mindset. Say, if I do this, then this is going to happen, right? That's an understanding that has the mindset start to shift.
I think it also has a lot to do with not knowing what the other party is most interested in.
Yes.
And sometimes even when I'm making different kinds of deals, I start to use the language of the other person. I seem to get through a lot easier as long as I understand what is meant by that term.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because, you're able to get, you said 2 things and they're related, right? One is understanding the other person and then starting to use their language. And what starting to use their language does is it has them feel heard, right? Mm-hmm. And it has you speaking in a way that they can understand, of course, because it's their language. So it's a deep understanding of, and with a smart strategy applied, to it. Yeah.
Listening has everything to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, what I call deep listening, and and watching expressions and body language, and just that it's a whole package as far as I'm concerned. And it's about managing yourself, being aware about what you're saying and doing and what you look like, and also keeping your eye on the other person and seeing if they give you any clues.
So let's break each of those down, because I talk about this in negotiating, I talk about it in deal making. Obviously, there is the other party, and there's that understanding of the other party and doing your external due diligence and understanding where they're coming from, what they want, and then there's getting clear on what you want. And one of the things that I often say is that, frankly, where a lot of us skimp, and it's not only in deals and negotiating, but it's in life, is doing that hard inner work to get that deeper understanding of who we are and why we function the way we do and why we react the way we do and why we become emotional or don't become emotional, what triggers us, all that kind of stuff. So I know it's a pretty open-ended question, but I purposely want it to be open-ended because of your deep understanding of emotional intelligence. How does all of that, impact our business success and our deals, and what do we need to do to get better, at, having that kind of success? Because, so many of us find amazing ways to sabotage ourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In the world of emotional intelligence, there are three aspects that I think are mission critical. Self-awareness.
Yeah.
Back to your point of, do you know what you want?
Right.
Do you know how you're expressing yourself? Then self-management. You mentioned before triggers. I do a lot of coaching with people around understanding and pinpointing what the triggers are. And it could be something that's triggered by a statement. Or, I once coached an incredible salesperson who could not close a deal. Why? Because the person she was negotiating with reminded her of her ex-husband. And until we, went through a couple of layers, we weren't even aware of that, or she wasn't. And the third thing is empathy.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of work around empathy in terms of how it opens the door to really understanding the other person and ourselves. When you say to people, I've been where you are, that's a connection, wouldn't you say? That really it allows us to express ourselves be vulnerable as well. So, because that makes you human.
So I know that, again, I'm asking broad questions because I think this is a fascinating area and I don't want to limit the conversation, at least to start with, but how often, listen, I've been practicing law for 30 years, right? So I'm in all kinds of negotiations and deals for 35 years now. And, of course, and I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs and executives and business owners. And,
right.
And I see very often it's, the deal's not dying because somebody wants to, pay X and somebody wants to pay 90% of X most times, although that happens sometimes. But a lot of times it's dying because people get triggered about something. And in fact, I had a deal recently that ended up closing, but there was a point at which my client got very triggered. And frankly, there was some good reason. The lawyer on the other side was over lawyering. It was ridiculous. The process was getting dragged out. He was frustrated, and he told me to kill the deal. And I said, okay, I understand what you want. And then I didn't do anything for 2 hours and let him calm down. And then I said, hey, let's talk. And I had a conversation with him and said, listen, this is a good deal. I know the reasons you want to get it done. I understand why you're upset, and I think we can, move this forward. And he did, and now they closed the deal, and they're thrilled, right? But it's, that deal could have died in that moment, right? Not because it was a bad deal, not because of whatever, but because of the way this lawyer was, handling certain stuff and whatever. My client got triggered. how aware do you think the average person is? And this is my broad question to start with. How aware do you think the average person is about what triggers them and what really guides their behavior, right? Because there's so much more science nowadays to say that, at least what I've read, that the majority of a lot of what we do, we think we're making conscious choices, right, around it, but but we're just not.
Right. One of the things about trigger, and I wrote a whole chapter in one of my books about it. Triggers come from the most unexpected things, like the salesperson who saw her ex-husband, across the table. That'll trigger you,
Sure.
And one of the things that I don't know whether most of us know, but when we're triggered, we're actually dealing with a chemical reaction in the brain.
Yeah.
And it's that whole fight or flight. We are programmed so deeply with that it comes up in a lot of things. And until you're aware of what might be a trigger in a conversation, and even then, you're not sure what it is. But once you realize you're feeling slightly maybe a lot out of control, there's a chemical reaction that's taken place. And
Yes.
you did a very wise thing to tell the other side, let's come back in a couple of hours. Truthfully, it's something that I have used more times than I care to admit. It is, making sure, and I have done this. One of the strategies that's used in terms of managing a trigger is getting yourself out of the environment that the trigger occurred.
Yeah.
And so you don't have the visual stimulus continuing to hit you. I actually I was working with a client in the Wall Street area, and I saw things were not going well. So I decided to tell them it was a little fib, not much, that I had bad sushi at lunch. And I really wasn't feeling well. And I got up and, nobody stopped me. I haven't used that very often, but, it's a way to pull yourself from being brought in more.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. And it's something that I talk about. I have 3 core principles that I talk about in my negotiating book. And the first one is clarity. We talked about that, self-awareness, that knowledge. The second one is detachment, the ability not to get attached to an outcome or an issue, and the third one is maintaining your equilibrium. And one of the things I talk about is if, you may come in clear and think you're detached, but then you get triggered, something happens in the negotiation, somebody says something and your equilibrium gets thrown off. And, it is one of the several, tools that I give people is to say, just take a break, right? Separate from the environment, take a breath, go for a walk, call lunch, tell them whatever, you got to go to the bathroom, whatever it is, So what are some of the other things that people can do to either deal with triggers or even be more aware? Like sometimes people who have done less work even have trouble knowing that they're really being, triggered, right? Like even understanding. So what is the work people need to do to improve on that?
Well, one of the things I recommend to clients is being aware of your body. Mm-hmm. I mean, is your leg going up and down? Are your hands clamming? Do you have the sweat coming out of your ears? Whatever, you will get physical clues that you are getting triggered, and that it's just something to be aware of. And sometimes just, talking it up. As a matter of fact, some clients, I have them journal about when they are triggered.
Yeah.
So they write out exactly what they were feeling, how sweaty were their palms, how much chocolate did they eat?
Yep.
All those kinds of things. And that's another thing too. Sugar.
Yep.
Turn the dial up. So, having that self-awareness And then going into the self-management of it, not feeding yourself with a lot of sugar before you're going into a negotiation or even a discussion or even a feedback on performance.
Yeah.
All those are volatile. So sugar doesn't help.
Yeah, I hear that. So it's interesting. I want to sort of examine the flip side of something, and let me know your thoughts. So I think the easy thing to think about is if you're not in connection with the emotional intelligence, you get triggered. It's easy to blow a deal, a negotiation, a business opportunity, whatever it is, a relationship, you name it, because of your reactiveness, right? To getting triggered. But I want to look at, that's the easy one to see. I want to look at it on the other side, because one of the things that I talk about in the negotiations I do in deal making, and I'm wondering how it relates more in the brain science than the emotional intelligence side, is there is sometimes actually people end up not blowing a deal, but actually doing a bad deal because they have certain triggers that maybe they want to avoid confrontation. Maybe they are in a place of desperation or scarcity. There's all these things that come up for people that are not those kind of triggers that say, to hell with you, I'm out of here, but they're actually trigger people to do things they shouldn't do.
Don't we get the same clues though? Don't we get the same kind of clues? The sweaty palms,
I think so.
Your voice begins to quiver, or with me, sometimes I become very robot-like.
Right.
That's a clue. That's a clue, and just paying attention to that, I think helps. But more than anything, I believe that what is that old adage? 10% about awareness. Don't remember what it is. Preparation and awareness.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're working with folks, is it like, what triggers people to come to you? Is it a particular situation often that has, that goes bad or whatever, that has them say, I got to do something about this? Is it general dissatisfaction? Is it not, achieving what they want in life? Like, what triggers people to use a different, what causes people to say, hey, I should go speak to Dr. Pat?
Well, I think one thing that I've heard more often than not is, gee, I thought I would get that promotion. Mm. Gee, I thought I would get that job. There was something and it's not the qualifications.
Right.
It's something that the other person saw that made one unattractive. I don't want to get involved with you. So being aware of the situation you're going into and being very clear about what their requirements are. And sometimes there's an opportunity I think people should do research on whoever or whatever they're going to be looking at, right?
100%. Yeah, so, it's interesting to me. I mean, it's, I deal with this because obviously when people come to me as clients, they're wherever they're at. We're all only where we're at in a given situation, right? Mm-hmm. So, for me, it's sort of a twofold. There's I'm somebody who's committed to do a lot of personal business growth over my life and taking courses and reading and understanding the brain, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a life's work for me. And I think it's a big part of, honestly, what's had me be successful. Right. And then there's the in the moment stuff, right? So, and the thing is that, for me, I can tell people who've done work on themselves by the way it doesn't mean they may not get triggered in the moment or have something come up in the moment, but I can more often tell by the way they deal with that or recover from it or how long it lasts or how deep they go as to how much work they've done, in the long term on themselves. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, it is. People who find themselves kind of in this endless loop of failing, of not getting what they want. I hope they realize by the time they get, the reason they want to come to me is they are aware there's something not connecting.
Yeah.
And it's time to hold up the mirror and take a look at what you're doing, because any deal is, half and half.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because I mean, so many times, I've done a ton of work on myself and I'm not done.
Right. 100%. Me too. Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I mean, I guess, sharing a little bit about my journey is that, and I was sort of prefaced it is that, I think there's a combination. With all the work that I've done, I think I get triggered less often, right? Or, but I also recover better, right? Like, because I say less often, but it's not like I never get triggered. It's not like I never get hung up. It's not like I never get into some place of, I'm a pretty positive person overall, but not like I don't get negative at times or whatever it is,
Right.
But the tools I have help me get out of it more quickly, right? And recover from it and recognize it, more quickly. Because that's the other thing I find, like, especially when I was younger, like it would take me longer to even realize that I was not in a good place, even to recognize that, because it's easy for us to fool ourselves, right?
Absolutely. I got to ask you a question then. You talk
Sure.
about tools. What's your go-to tool to get you remotivated or refocused?
I guess I would say I would answer that in two ways, in two contexts. One is in the short term, right? In the moment kind of thing, right? I would say it's my breath. I mean, like I have, like I go to my breath, right? I've been, I've been trained. I do some meditation. I'm not a regular meditator, but I've done various, training in that and breath work and whatever. And to me, that connection to breath and that even reminder to breathe, right? Because normally, if I'm in a state where I'm not in the right place, I'm actually not breathing or not breathing, in the right way. So I would say in the short term, it's that. On sort of a bigger picture, and I've had examples in my life, and I talk about one of them in my negotiating book, where like if I'm in a challenging time in life, for me, my go-to is to get away out of the environment, right? And get reconnected to vision. Go away for a weekend, go somewhere and just reconnect. I have all these methodologies, vision boards, 5-3-1 thing that I teach people to do. So that's sort of the bigger thing. In the moment, it's breath for me.
It's interesting. In my first book, Cool Change, I when I worked in Wall Street institutions, it was more than tense. It was a whole test of my being.
Yes.
And especially being a female.
Yeah.
In some of the departments I worked in.
Yes.
And I write in the book about when I used to commute home on the train up to Westchester, I would drink.
Right.
Those kinds of habits are crutches.
Yeah.
Crutches. And they should be telling us something. And that's where self-awareness comes in. And sometimes, frankly, that's when a friend comes in.
Yeah.
And makes you aware of what's happening and frankly, that you have a lot of control over it.
Yes.
And maybe you need some help, but just be aware of it and understand how those kinds of stimulus alter everything in you, your understanding, your willingness to work and cooperate. So that's those kinds of things. And I know there are many people in their autobiographies who talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know a successful person and I'm a big reader of especially autobiographies. I like when people write themselves, especially when if it's not some ghost written kind of,
right.
The surface thing, if it's real, because, usually, pretty much nobody has a straight line, to the top. There's been ups and downs. There's been bumps and bruises. There's been lessons. There's been mistakes. So what are some of the other, so you asked me on a couple, you've mentioned a couple, what's the other work that, what are the other tools and techniques that people can use to get that self-awareness, get connected to their emotional intelligence, to do, better deals, have better relationships, have everything better in their life? What's some of the other, what work do people need to do? What are some of the other things they can do?
You mentioned something that I very often advise clients to do, and that is go get a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do my coaching sessions outside.
Yeah.
Walking around, talking. We'll sit if we have to, or whatever. But that fresh air helps us, center ourselves, and it seems less intimidating to my clients, because we're out there and we're just talking with each other. So that's one of the things about, and I think that's something that's going to shift in the workplace now. After the pandemic, people are going to want to be outside someplace else other than their cube or their office.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to help a lot. I keep reading all these articles about, that companies can't get people back into the offices.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why that could be. And what did the alternative reality we lived through the last 15 months, what did that give us that we want more of?
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting because, any kind of significant shift like that affects your perspective, right?
Absolutely.
And obviously there were some challenges, but I think it's also any challenging time often has us, especially if we're willing to do any kind of internal work, come to some realizations that are ultimately helpful, right? Give us some more clarity on what is working for us and what is not, because it's so easy. There's a book I read some years ago that I thought was good. I think it's called The Power of Habit, but talking about brain science, right? There's so much we do by rote, by habit, without even thinking about it, right? And there's from a brain function point of view, that's actually crucial, because you can't, you have to be able to do certain things on autopilot, or else you'd be right. I mean, the brain can only do right. So it's a good adaptability thing as human beings that we have that, but it also gets us into these situations where so much of our lives are often just what they are, right? And they're run by habit, and sometimes it takes one of these, whether it's personal life events or societal global events, pandemic, whatever, to have us, break out of that and at least take a step back and reevaluate it, right?
And I've actually had 2 or 3 clients contact me during this. It's not a hiatus; it's a shift.
Yes.
And wanting to go a little deeper into the work that we had done, and all my clients, we start with an assessment, whether it be a Berkman or an EQI. We start with an assessment, that baseline. And people have gone back to that, and they've read through it, and they see the connection between why something's working for them now that didn't work for them before. That is just, talk about self-work, staying aware around, who you are now. It makes such a difference in the quality of your life, and accepting the changes that have happened, whether forced upon you or you made them.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense for them to review and say, yeah, that worked for me. That doesn't work for me anymore.
Yeah. And I think, you want to talk about, for me, one of the differences between people who are successful and happy and, truly successful. For me, success doesn't mean necessarily a lot of money, although I'm not one who, I think abundance is part of success. If you're truly successful, I'm not, but it's only one piece. But for me, it's really, there are people who have the same or similar stimulus. And in this case, the pandemic's a great example of where, yes, I'm not saying we're all affected the same way, but there were a lot of similar inputs that we all dealt with, and you see how people deal with it very differently, right? And whether the people who successfully pivoted in their businesses, whether the ones who used it to become more resilient, or the other way, and it's it's a great test. I mean, my wife, has called this pandemic the sacred pause, and even just that reframing of it,
absolutely,
in my mind, says a lot, right, about my wife's approach, right? Some people, this is, and again, I want to make clear to the audience, I'm not minimizing the impact. I know people whose parents have passed away, who's major, so I'm not minimizing that. But if you study folks, people's attitudes, people's level of success, things like that, are not correlated to what happens to them. It's correlated to their reaction to what happens to them. Covey said, in between stimulus and response is choice. That's what makes us different than human beings. And that's a fundamental belief I have in life. We don't control our circumstances, but we do control our relationship.
That's right.
To them. So for me, this pandemic has been a big, example of that. It sounds like you've seen the same, sort of feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting when, as I said, I get a former client who, rings me up and, and says, I want to kind of revisit some things that we talked about years ago or a year ago. And for them to have this, it's an assessment of a marker, if you will, in their lives. It becomes a good platform from which either to jump off of or dig into.
Yeah.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to CoreyKupfer.com/assessment. That's CoreyKupfer.com/assessment and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show.
So talk to us a little bit about who you work with most. People have obviously gotten a feel for the type of stuff you do, and just in our conversation. But if you want to talk more specifically on that, but who's your typical client? And how do people work with you? And then also, how do people get in touch with you if they're interested?
Oh, sure. Well, over the years, there have been many other shifts in my life. And when I started my career, it was mostly working with executives in technology in financial services.
Yep.
Totally different world than where I came from, a kid from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So that was the group that I served at that time. And as time went on, what I found I was doing was looking for people, mostly women, who have come through a process and want to be better. Mm-hmm. They want to be more themselves. They want to really understand themselves and be better able to relate to other people that they must work with.
Yes.
So women in the workplace in the last 5-10 years has been my focus, and also diverse individuals that have come into roles that they must work with people very different from who they are. So that's been my focus, and emotional intelligence is a great way. It's a great platform again to connect with people, because most of us have emotions. Most of us. One of the things that I ask people a question: how many emotions do you think we have? What do you think?
I don't know. Like, I remember hearing there's only, I don't know. I guess different theories. I remember hearing there's only 7 or 8 fundamental emotions, or 3 or 5 or something like that. But I don't know if that's the direction you're going, or if you have a different view on it.
No. It actually. Did you see that movie Inside Out?
I don't think so, actually.
By Disney? No?
I don't think so.
It's worth taking, a few minutes to go through, because
Okay.
it's about emotions
Okay.
and how they appear differently and how they interact with each other and how they cause parts of our brain to work differently.
Mm.
It's something, it can be considered a kid's movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't.
Got it.
Because
Got it.
we don't really understand our brain. We don't really understand the role of emotions, and how to manage those. So
Yes.
that's an interesting thing. But actually, the latest research,
Yes.
and it has varied over the years, is that we actually have 27 emotions.
Okay. Okay.
And take anger, for example.
Yep.
Anger can go from annoyance to rage.
Yep.
And
Okay.
there are stages all the way along.
I see. So the 27 breaks that down into more, right? It depends on that. Now, just because this is something I've heard and sort of believed in and had some experience with in certain contexts, but I'm curious. The other thing that I heard one time is that anger is never a root emotion, meaning that there's a theory that says there's always some other emotion underneath anger, right? It could be, or there's whatever that's triggering the anger. There's always something deeper than the anger. Is that?
Yeah, and a lot of things get triggered by fear.
Yeah.
And everything from fear of not being enough to a fear of failing, fear of disappointing people, and that can come out in many different ways. Overachiever, because you don't want to fail anybody. And getting in touch with, and it's not so much the psychology, but it's just getting in touch with that could potentially be why you're feeling and doing certain things that are not leading you to the kind of outcome that you want. And yet again, self-awareness, self-management.
Yeah, it's interesting, because fear is in my authentic negotiating book. I have a chapter on the 6 reasons negotiations fail, and they're all emotions, right? Or it's ego, angle, fear. I talk about various types of fear of success, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, all these things that have people not be successful in negotiating. But of course, it applies way beyond the negotiating realm.
Yeah. And let me just add one other thing.
Please.
One of the things that I have been working with myself and with some clients is this whole thing of self-empathy. That whole thing of give yourself a break.
Yep.
Kind of stuff that once in a while a good friend of yours will sit you down and say, give yourself a break. Take a breath. You're doing the best, and this I say all the time to my family, you're doing the best you know how.
Yes.
Based on what you know.
Yes.
So and that's something that if we put our arms around that and accept that, we're going to be able to manage not only our relationships, our negotiations, our encounters with other people.
Yeah. Well, they say often that if ever, especially for folks who are really in a negative place, that voice in their head that tells them about themselves, like if they ever said that about someone else, they would be appalled, right? But yet, they let those monkeys keep telling them.
Yeah, it's just simply I have it pasted into one of my journals. Self-empathy, caring for yourself, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing so much work in the world of resilience and thriving. Because self-care matters.
Yeah.
It really matters when you're trying to manage relationships, manage emotions. Self-care really matters.
No question. And listen, I think, I talk about that in deals and negotiating as well. I mean, it's, as business leaders, as executives, as entrepreneurs, we're in such a culture where it's about drive, achieve, do more, et cetera.
Mm.
And also, especially us entrepreneurs, feel like we can shoot from the hip and we're good on our feet and whatever. And, so, it's almost a badge of honor sometimes, oh yeah, I only had 3 hours sleep last night and I just whatever. And, I've seen that lack of self-care blow up so many deals and relationships because, and listen, I also don't want to, listen, I do a lot of traveling. I'm on planes. I do, trust me, I'm not somebody who's sitting around, but I've gotten so much better at focusing on how I take care of myself because especially as you get older, it gets tougher and it affects you more. And I've seen it, I've seen situations where deals, relationships, negotiations, whatever it is, go sour. And a lot of it is because the person just is exhausted or, just,
Exactly.
Just hasn't been taking care of themselves and they're just not in the right frame of mindset or whatever. So it's such an important point, Pat, it really is.
Exactly. It's something that, again, during this 15-month period has really come to a head for myself, my friends, my family. We've lost so many relatives through this. So we have to always remember we need to take care of ourselves so we can manage the aftermath of this.
Yeah.
So it's really a very interesting world, and we're constantly negotiating. To your point.
100%. And it's interesting because, there's also that piece, and I had the pleasure of had the pleasure of, reading and spending time with some other folks who are really big on, on negotiating. And there's been a movement of, William Ury, for example, who was one of the co-authors of Getting to Yes, one of the classic negotiating books. He wrote a more recent book a couple of years ago called Getting to Yes with Yourself. And it was more of this conversation about, he felt that the one thing that was missing from the classic Getting to Yes was the negotiation you have with yourself, was that internal work, So that's what his book a few years ago was about. And it definitely aligns, with the work I'm doing and with the conversation that Pat and I are having right now, so.
Yeah.
So Dr. Pat, what's the best place for people to find out more about you if they want to just see more of your content or potentially work with you or, website, anything you want to give?
Well, okay. Well, it's www.patriciabaxter.com, which is my website. My email is pat@patriciabaxter.com. Very, very clever.
Right. Easy.
And on through those two mediums, you can take a look at how to get in touch with me. I'm also constantly putting on articles and doing YouTubes, etc., sharing what it is I've learned along the way. Some of it not pretty, but learning what have I learned along the way, and I want to share it with everyone.
I love that. I usually go straight to my final question, but I'm just called to, can you give us one example of a personal story of, that had you really learn something, for yourself?
Okay. So you want that alphabetically? Again, like I said before, I relied on other substances to help me through some difficult times where I didn't know who I was, why I was, and I needed to pull back, and especially in the last few years, because when you're, to your earlier point, when you go, you can be gone and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have simply inserted into my life is I stopped to be with family. I stopped to be with friends. And my husband and I have been scaling back in so many ways. So, I mean, we've gone from a 5,000 square foot house to one that's only 22 square feet. And I mean, some 2,200 square feet. And some people would say, what? That's nice. It really comes with a lot of burden, responsibility, and that energy goes everywhere else except to you, your whoever you're loved with and who you live with, and your family and your community. So that's kind of the stuff I've learned along the way, and I don't take those lessons lightly.
Yeah, powerful. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate you being willing to share that. So my final question is around my highest ideal in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means freedom from oppression for everybody in the world to the reason I'm an entrepreneur and I don't work for somebody, right? The freedom to sort of live my life the way I want it. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Freedom means, the first word that comes to me is choice. I have a choice to how I live, who I love, who I work with, and who I don't work with. Yeah. That's been a big one. There had been some deals that the person I worked with or for was poisoned. Yeah. They were poisoned. Yeah. So I've learned to walk away and know that I'll be okay. That's the big one. Love it.
Dr. Pat Baxter, thank you for being an amazing guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. And take care of yourself, okay?
Hey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.corykupfer.com/dealden. That's corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.